Good evening, everyone. Hope you are well. Hope you are staying safe. My name is Nagwekar. I am project lead for the Homemaker series at tellmeastory.biz. That's tellmeastory.biz. And welcome to the last and to the final session of the Homemaker Talk series. We are here today with Tanushree with Sonali Mitra, and author Nazneen Kachwala will also be joining us. She's facing some technical difficulties. Welcome to the last session of the Homemaker. The topic for today is the representation of homemakers in literature. This will relate strictly to prose literature since both our selected contributors of the Homemaker anthology have both written short stories, and they will have a chance to be in conversation with Tanushree Poddar, an established author and seasoned in this area. Their works, of course, can be found on Amazon, edited by yours truly. But before we get into all of that, let's get into introducing the contributors for the Homemaker anthology. We have Sonali Mitra here today. Sonali, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Neil, for having me over.
Sonali Mitra is the author of the short story titled A Journey Home. She is an engineer by education and an MBA alumni of ISB Hyderabad. Although passionate about creative writing since childhood and committed to daily journaling, this is the first time, after editorial stints in schools and universities, that she has come out to share her writing with those around. She is currently based in Bangalore, enjoying an abundant life with her twin daughters. Sonali has had a checkered career as a consultant, banker, e-commerce evangelist, and is currently part of the leadership team for digital at IKEA. Her short story In the Homemaker is a true narrative of a real incident in her life last year. We will get into this narrative, which is titled A Journey Home, very shortly. But for now, let me introduce Nazneen Kachwala. Nazneen, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, perfect, Nazneen. You are audible as well. Uh, Thank you for being with us here today. Nazneen is the author of the story titled Impasse. Nazneen Kachwala is an engineer and writer by profession. Her stories are published in the Times of India, the Optimist Citizen newspaper, and Madras Courier. She founded Wing Fables, a creative platform for artists, book lovers, and social innovators in 2018. Nazneen works on independent, inventive projects, documents constructive stories on her website, interviews noble minds to create a human library, and has a paper published in her name with the UNESCO BRICS nations. Besides this, she has a penchant for history, astronomy, and yoga. Quite the impressive resume there. And last but definitely not the least, we have esteemed author Tanushree Poddar. A well-known novelist, Tanushree has published 15 novels, some of which include Noor Jahan's Daughter, On the Double, A Closet Full of Skeletons, Before You Breathe, and Spooky Stories. Two of her books, Boots, Belts, Berets, and The Girls in Green, are currently being adapted into web series. She has published a dozen best-selling non-fiction titles, but she has been writing fiction for the last 15 years. Tanushree, this shift from non-fiction to fiction in the last decade or so is very fascinating to me, and I would like to ask you that in your vast experience of writing both non-fiction as well as fiction, in your experience, how much of writing fiction should be rooted in real or non-fictional elements?
Thank you, Neil, for this lovely opportunity and TMYS Coral Dasgupta. It's a nice, feeling to be amongst other writers who have won the Tell Me Your Story contest. And I always prefer to interact with the young minds because one learns so much from them. As far as your question goes, yes, I have transited from nonfiction to fiction. The very reason I started writing nonfiction was because I hardly knew anything about the publishing industry. We were posted in a remote area. My husband is he was in the army. So we often were posted to very, very remote areas where we were not connected at all. So I was totally out of touch with the real world and knew nothing. At the same time, I had a lot of time on my hand. I had been a journalist and I can never do without writing. So the only next possible thing was to step into the world of story writing or publishing. So, since I didn't know anything, I started with what I thought was easier. And that for me, because of my journalist background, was nonfiction. Okay. and I started, sort of going around exploring the publishing world, and I got taken in for a ride. I was duped very, very badly initially. I must warn all of you that there are lots and lots of unscrupulous publishers who take advantage of gullible writers. Some of us are so fascinated with the world of publishing that we just want to get our work published. And then these are the people like us who get cheated. So this is just a word of warning, but much has changed since then. I'm talking about, say, in 1998, when there wasn't the internet, there wasn't so much of, social media wasn't there, even mobiles were not there. So, we didn't know what was happening around us to that extent, like we do now. So anyway, from non-fiction, I decided to transit to fiction because I felt that I had done quite a lot of non-fiction. I just want, and this is one thing about me, that I get bored very easily, and I like to challenge myself. So moving from one area to the other is a challenge, and I felt stepping into fiction was a challenge, and I took it up and I started. And my first book was Noorjahan's Daughter. And since then, I have been writing fiction for the last about 15 years. So the transition isn't very easy, in the sense that now you have a lot of narrative nonfiction, which is a little closer to fiction. But hardcore nonfiction was quite different. You don't see too much of it now, which was so prevalent in those days. So it was a big transition, and one had to, learn the ropes of writing fiction, holding the reader's attention, and the finding the right voice, right expression, and the right kind of approach to storytelling. I don't know if that answers your question, Neil.
It does, but people often say that fiction is a great way to mirror reality itself. And having written non-fiction and fiction, you seem to have experience for both. So my question is that when you do write fiction, there obviously need to be some non-fictional, let's say, elements to fiction.
Elements.
It needs
Yes.
to mirror.
Uh,
Sorry.
yeah.
Go
See, Albert Camus said, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. So basically, fiction is just an extension of the reality. So we have to remain in the real world while writing fiction. Only if you are doing something like speculative fiction, or say a kind of imaginative kind of a fiction, where you go to say 2040 or 50, and you're imagining the world, then it might not be rooted in truth and reality that much. It'll be more of imagination. In fact, the other day I was just reading that one of the horror writers had written this book, say about 20 years back. And in that, he spoke about this deadly germ that spreads to the world, and, affects the global, population. And see, today we have come to that stage when we have coronavirus, so not all that has been imagined is untrue. So there is a lot of link between imagination, reality, truth, and untruth, because whatever you are saying even in fiction is not entirely untrue. There are strands of truth woven inside the fictional story that you are telling. For instance, you are talking about contemporary scenario where you stay. So you have a social aspect, you have a cultural aspect, which you're covering in your fiction. At the same time, if you're writing about history, then you have to do research and you have to set your story in those truths, even if it is fictional. So, to that extent, they are all true.
That's a very good answer. And of course, I love the reference to Albert Camus there. Let's talk about homemakers before we move on to the contributors. because the contributors themselves have written stories primarily related to the story prompt. Tanushree, what are the different kinds of homemakers you would like to see represented in literature in India?
When we talk about a homemaker, we generally have this imagination that it is a woman and it is a home. So the link between home and woman is what makes it, you know, more palpable to the public. But in my mind, we have to traverse the entire landscape and get beyond that, and think about the gay couples wherein one person is a homemaker and the other person is doing the man's role. So we haven't represented it enough. I would like to see that part also being, touched upon.
That's very true. And I think Sonali and Nazneen have sort of begun to see that area of literature that is still now rather underrepresented. Before we move on to the contributors, Tanushree, I was wondering if you would be willing to read an excerpt from one of your books so that the audience who may have been introduced to you for the first time today have a better idea of
Um,
the matter.
Yeah, so I'll read out from my latest book. This is The Invitation to Die. This is the third in the series of Colonel Acharya mysteries. And in fact, when you said web series, the first one of this lot, the first one was Closet Full of Skeletons. That has also been taken for adaptation. It's not yet been social media announcements have not come in, but just telling you.
That's quite incredible. I mean, when it does come
Okay.
out, we have to have a chat about the remediation of how the book was written versus how the show came out. But of course,
Absolutely. In fact, the Girls in Green manuscript was accepted before it was published. So the adaptation contract was signed before a year before I got the publishing contracts, to sign. So it happens. Now, I'll be reading out a chapter, the beginning of a chapter, where this is set in a fictional place called Ramsar, which is a Himalayan town. It's a small town and a hill station. So I'll read out from here. While Lakshmi and Urmila slurped their milky tea a little distance away at Elm Cottage on Ludlow Street, a group of four women chatted over tea and cakes. The women belonged to the tiny population of Anglo Indians in Ramsar who had resisted the call of foreign shores and chosen to live in the small hill town. Quaintly known as the Firangi colony, the place smelt of baking and roses, which grew in abundance in each cottage. Most of the residents of the colony, where women outnumbered men, had worked in the Indian Railways, Indian Post and Telegraph, and defense services. Having retired from their careers, they now spent their twilight years in the serene town. Their needs were few and hobbies fewer. They were satisfied with good food, drinks, and plenty of gossip. There was a small but impressive church with a bell tower, the bell having long gone out of service. The cemetery behind the church, with its rows of flower beds and greenery, stood facing a mountain. It would be a nice place to rest one's body, felt the elderly residents of Firangi Colony. The church was a place where they congregated more for social interaction than religious fervor. The preaching and sermons were incidental. The inhabitants were a jolly lot. They lived for the day, eating, drinking, and enjoying a friendly game of cards or chess. Everyone knew everybody, including their birthdays and anniversaries. Every occasion was a reason to celebrate. Is that enough?
more than enough, Tanushree. Thank you so much for that. I really
Thank
love
you.
how you've written scene here and how it's just very easy to picture the entire tour, the media around it, the culture of the people. But anyway, I would like to leave questions and comments for our contributors. Let's move to the contributors now. Uh, The one question that I would really like to ask to either Nazneen and Sonali is that when the homemaker prompt sort of when you found it on your phones or on your social medias, uh, you have both written very distinctive stories. What was the impulse or the inspiration that sort of triggered you to write this aspect of the homemaker? So, if it's okay, can we begin with Nazneen here?
Yeah. So, Neil, as you said, my story basically, so I have been, basically brought up in Muslim mohallas. I've been living in Muslim mohallas for a very, very long time now. And I have been a witness to the stories of all the women around me, be it my neighbors, be it close relatives, friends. I have seen these stories of their struggle, daily combats, their triumphs unfold before my eyes. Now, the story that I have written, as you said, is inspired by true events, and it is basically about two women. One of them is a maid, and the other woman is someone for whom she works for. I was basically inspired to, or more, I had an interest to tell the story of the maid who herself had a family of her own behind, but she worked for a family dedicatedly. She served her family for several years, and after some years, that family became her priority. And that somewhat, I was not able to understand the dedication of people to an extent. The only reason why she left her job was because the financial struggles at her end became unbearable for her. And those financial struggles were again linked with the financial struggles of the family with whom she was working with. And at that point, the character of Hamida comes into picture. So the maid is Saira. Hamida is the one who she works for. Now Hamida is married into a very she's married to a very rich, reputed man of the community, and she has never faced any problems. But suddenly, this family undergoes some major financial crisis, and it is at that point when Hamida steps up and she comes out of her comfort zone and she takes charge of the situation at a point when her husband has already given up. So, this kind of story we hear so often. We hear it. It is, it is so common. We hear it everywhere. It is so common in a way that we have stopped giving importance to these stories, and we consider them not worth sharing anymore. And this is actually the point that inspired me to tell the story, that these things are also happening, and it happens, all of us know, but we don't share it anymore. So that was basically the point which influenced me to write this.
I really like that. Excuse me. I really like that point of influence because when people live in a particular culture, they're sort of brought up with those norms and they consider those norms as truths or false. And like you said, they don't even think it's a story worth writing about because it's just sort of so everyday, so unextraordinary for them. But it's only when someone like you writes a story and brings it to people who have not at all lived that life, do they see how different reality can be. So I really like that inspiration, Nazneen. I want to move on to Sonali because she has written a completely non-fictional account and a very dramatic account of her travels from Bangalore to Noida. Could you expand on why you or how you managed to write about this personal experience of yours?
Sure, and thank you for the question, Neil. So I think, like I shared with you, right? I mean, I write a lot for private consumption. This is probably one of the very first few times that I'm coming out in the open, and I think what really grabbed me was the prompt of the homemaker, right? So the prompt really spoke about challenging stereotypes, redefining the societal tags, questioning the role of gender at home, so on and so forth, right? And that's something that I personally resonate with a lot, right? So when I deal with the question of family a lot, right? Because we've grown up thinking of a mom and a dad and kids as family, but now I'm really thinking that, could it be two dads? Could it be a mom and a dog? So what, so those are really a lot of breaking of definitions that's happening. And I think when the prompt came and it said about pandemic, so I was really able to resonate instantly the theme of redefining tags with what I thought was a, well, that's what I faced in a very specific incident last year. And basically everything was challenging, India, the population, who are the people who help you around, and basically just about everything that you do was, we think we are playing a part of the homemaker, but it's not really that, and the performance is just influenced by so many other stakeholders. So I thought, without really thinking about social media or the platform, it was more about, I have a story and that speaks to the prompt, and that's what got me to writing the piece that I did.
Uh, if it's not too much trouble, Sonali, could you read a short excerpt from a journey home so that the audience have an idea of what the story is about?
Sure, I good, yeah. I felt weirdly hollow after Anirudh dropped me off home, and I entered my room in the wee hours of the morning. It was as though a drama had ended, and I finally had to face the reality. I had lost my dad, but what was strange was that this challenging and emotionally draining journey had in fact showed me a new light. It had broken some of my myths, and I had challenged the norms that defined my conditioned mind. I was surprised to note that despite the grief of his loss, I felt abundant and grateful inside. Grateful for the fact that Pa had passed away peacefully. Grateful that he had led a proud life that won him friends that lasted even after he was gone. I noted with gratitude that divorce wasn't necessarily the end of a relationship, but it could be the start of a new one. I realize that conscious choices made towards our own individual and specific life needs are a lot more rewarding than herd choices. I realize that a foreigner boss, 20 years my senior, was more selfless and loving than most who I considered my own. More importantly, I realize that to be a mother does not mean to stop being a woman, and to be a woman does not mean always to be in a romantic relationship. Unconditional relationships, like what I shared with Ani, are not defined on the dating apps that we actually met each other on, but instead are formed along the journeys that we walk together.
Thank you so much for that excerpt, Sonali.
Thank you.
Nazneen, would you like to read an excerpt of Impasse?
Yeah, I'll do that. So, so this one is from Saira Appa's story. Um, she says that I had a good experience in nursing. Years ago, when I was around 14, Abu had developed incurable stomach ulcers. I cleared up the soiled beddings and floor whenever he vomited. After he was gone, I was married to Sakir. He was a raging alcoholic. But who was clear of all flaws? He just couldn't do without drinking. Within 8 months of our marriage, I found out that he had to pay 5,000 rupees to Sultan, the local wine shop owner. One day, it was 3 hours past Isha Namaz and he hadn't returned home. I went searching for him at my mother in law's, but my sister in law drove me out. I could not bring enough dowry, you see. Ammi could give me only 3 pairs of clothes with 2 silver bangles. I had other sisters too. She was thoughtful to divide her jewelry equally amongst us. They cursed me for Sakar's ill habits, and I couldn't give them a grandson either. What could I say when they had all the right? All the women I knew delivered within a year of their marriage, and here I was, 8 months already, and no news. I was scared to visit the wine shop. If Sakir knew I was even around that place, he would beat me up, but I had no choice. Just when I crossed the lane next to Badri Masjid, I found Sakir laying unconscious on the side of the road. His face was bruised and his arms had thick blue marks. The stench of his body attracted perhaps 100 flies. Sultan had thrown him out of his shop. He demanded his pending dues. That is when I knew I had to go out and earn the money to pay our debt. Salim got me a cleaning job at one of the chawls in the city. The pay was less, but Ami encouraged me to take it. Sakir didn't approve of me going to work this way. People in the mohalla and my sister in law had already spoken to him. I knew what I decided to do was inappropriate, but you can still see some of the belt marks on my left leg. But gradually I learned. I kept aside 50 rupees from my salary for Sakir's drinks every month. Although he was not completely happy, the beating was reduced to once a month and sometimes even once in 3 months. This way, I was able to save 5,000 rupees in 2 years, only to find out now we had a debt of 8,600 rupees.
I love that. I love how casually, these these domestic violences are just sort of mentioned as if it's just passing, as if it's just every day, and it doesn't have to be so specifically, said that it is normal. It's just in the passage. It just brings out that effect. But I know Nazneen and Sonali, you guys are not here to listen to my reviews. So, and I also know that you have a lot of questions for Tanushree. So I'll now step to the side and I'll let the top contributors take the floor. From this point on, Nazneen, Sonali, feel free to ask any questions you may have to Tanushree. If it's alright, we will begin with Tanushree's thoughts on your works and we'll go from there. So, Tanushree, could you let us know what you thought of Nazneen's work in fact?
Yes, thanks, Neil. I think I love their stories. They were poignant and without being over dramatic, because it's so important to have a balanced view. You can sometimes, because it is a personal, in case of Sonali, since it is a personal experience she is narrating, one can easily go over the top. And it's balance and a kind of a non-judgmental look at the same time, which is required while addressing such write-ups, which you have achieved to a very good degree, I would say. And I love the premise of your writing, the very fact that you have spoken about the world being, a family. We always talk about Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means the entire world is connected in a family. And we are seeing that more and more now, especially when we have had COVID and all those things. We are seeing that it's all a world which we are all, somehow related and connected. So I like that premise very much, and I loved your, narrative. And Nazneen, I think your story was a beautiful story and it touched the heart. And again, without going over the top, you brought out a whole lot of factors that are actually, a pest in our society these days. Even now, when we have advanced to such a degree, when we talk about women's liberation and independence and an entity of their own, we still have some segments of society where they are mistreated. And it happens even, I would say, it's not just in one strata, it's all across the board, across the globe. I have heard of stories when I travel through the world where women are mistreated. They feel the, sexism, they feel the racism and every other factor, more so in, situations where they are put without their own, of no choosing of their own. So I love the way you brought out those factors. And like Neil said, the domestic violence, you handled it very, very well without going over the top. So now you can shoot your questions and I'll answer to my best capacity.
Yeah. So I'll ask a question, Sonali, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, please.
So yeah, I basically had a feedback from one of the readers, and she said that I have used too much, or I have integrated too much of the cultural part into the story. And she had to take a break. So that was like an off for her. She had to take a break, and she had to understand those terms, and then she had to come back and read the story. So I just want to know how can I, and I for a reason wanted to give purposely that flavor to the story, the cultural flavor to the story. How can I balance out these elements in my story going forward?
I think it's a very important part of your story. The cultural background is the most important aspect of your story, because that tells the reader the entire situation that they're going through. If you just take that off, the story would not be as impactful. You know, let me tell you, Nazneen, that many times we come across such criticism, and one has to be very specific about what one wants to do, not what others want you to do. As a writer, you will often find yourself in a dilemma, wondering whether this would be, accepted by the reader. I don't think that's fair. You should speak your own thoughts. It is your story, your narrative, and your mind and conscience will tell you which is the right approach. And as far as the words are concerned, I think a little glossary could help the readers who feel that way,
Mhm.
that they are challenged and they want to go and refer to the words. But a glossary, just at the end of every page, we have a bottom note, and that note, can explain the word very clearly. So I don't think you should really feel that you have to change it, because it is a very, very important part of your story.
Mm.
And as a writer, Nazneen, you will have to face a lot of criticism. You will have to, stand by your own convictions and be very, very confident about what you are writing. Because even at this stage, I get a lot of brickbats. So you do feel hurt. As human beings, we feel, oh my God, that person is not satisfied. I've dissatisfied a reader. But then we have to understand everyone's preferences are different. We all have different tastes, we all have different viewpoints. So you cannot please everyone. There'll be some people who will not like what you have written, but at the same time, there'll be 100 others who have liked it. So just go ahead and express yourself.
Thank you.
Nazneen, if I can chip in and just add in to your question, just as a reader of your of the impasse, right? I mean, I felt like I read the first paragraph, and exactly your usage of the cultural dimensions is what got me interested. I thought it was more authentic because of the terms that you used, right?
Mhm.
When you say nikah and not wedding, then I actually referred to your name and background, and it just seemed so much more richer and so much more flavorful because of the certain really seeped in culture words that you use. So for me, it worked brilliantly. I think it added to the story.
In fact,
Okay.
Nazneen, if you read Underlib writes absolutely, about the Muslim background and the stories. She has written hundreds of stories and so many books, and they're very well accepted. So I don't think that is a
Mhm.
deterrent at all. You just write from the
Right.
heart, that's it.
Right. Or okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I think what Tanushree just said, one has to be very specific about what one wants to do, not what others want them to do. I think I'm going to like write that on a post-it and keep it near me every time I hear criticism. That's very good advice. Sorry for cutting in there. Sonali, do you have a
No, no,
question for
Neil.
us?
I think, as writers, one thing that we have to learn is to develop a little thicker skin, because if you go through the reviews, there'll be a lot of people saying something. Even I have heard similar kind of a criticism for one of my books, where they said the colloquial language, the some expressions didn't go well with the reader. Now those were intrinsic to the story. I cannot change those. So sorry for that.
True, absolutely fair enough.
Maybe the question that I have also to shoot off you, Tanushree, is a little related to what we are discussing here. So, because when we are writing, it's we are not our readers, right? So maybe our lenses differs from that of our readers. So I'm just curious: do we, when is it most effective a piece of literature, when we are really expressing ourselves, uninhibited and spontaneous, or we also have an element of keeping what appeals to the reader readers, right? And I'm just reading because I force my daughters to listen to me, and they tell me, but this is your story, and it doesn't really, so it's a little bit about which lenses do you take most care of when you're writing.
Sonali, once again, I'll reiterate that the best of the stories are those which are written from your heart. And your heart will not listen to what others want you to write, it will tell the story the way it wants to say.
Hmm.
You have narrated a story which is so close to your heart, you have gone through that experience, so there's an element of personal touch in it. When your daughters say that, and firstly let me tell you, daughters are never the good people to consult. My
Objective.
daughters, they'll shoot down every book if I was to ask, so I don't even bother about them, because they think the mom is a mom, not a writer. So we are no writers to them. So the only people you can really trust is someone who can give you, uh, without mincing words, criticize your work. At the same time, not in a judgmental manner, but a very, very helpful, constructive manner. So constructive criticism is always welcome, but negative, destructive one, which is aimed to destroying the writer's morale, is never welcome. You have to fend yourself and keep yourself safe from those.
Sure.
And yet, you don't write to please readers. This is one thing you must learn at the beginning. You are writing because you have a story to tell. You want to tell that story, and not because the readers want you to tell the story, because then it won't be the
Sure.
authentic kind.
True.
That's my personal view, Sonali. As I just always
That's so true.
clarify, it is my personal view, what I believe in, what I do, and it has helped me good for so many decades. So I guess it works.
That makes a lot of sense.
I have a question, probably in continuation to what Sonali said. So, Sonali's story and my story, both of us, we have written in the first person narration. How can we make this narration more interesting?
See, when it is narrative nonfiction, as in your case, it is almost a narrative nonfiction, where it's an incident, but you are giving thoughts and feelings to the story, the incident. In such cases, first person works very well because it has a ring of truth in it, and it reaches the reader, it appeals to them, they feel a part of the story. But at the same time, there are a lot of pitfalls when you write in first person. So firstly, you see, the credibility that you get as a narrator in first person may not be so when you are narrating the story in a third person. Okay. Now, from my experience, I have written 6 books with the first person approach. And you can say they are, sort of most of them are narrative nonfiction. So they are true stories told in a imaginative manner. And a voice is actually basically the eye through which you are looking at that story. So when you're using a first person, what often happens is, though it resonates with the reader, there's a credibility, there is uh, the reader identifies just as you are identifying yourself with the story, but there are certain pitfalls. One of them is that you cannot be omniscient as a first person. You cannot be saying, okay, that person thought this. How can you can't go into that person's mind. So the restrictions are there. Since you as a first person cannot be uh, seeing the thoughts and whatever that person is wanting to do, you can only see the action, but you cannot see the preemptive things that are happening inside that person's mind. So that's a restriction. It takes a lot of skill to put it there. And the other restriction I find is that if you repeat too many I's, because first person is all about I, me, ourselves, and us, that can be it can put readers off, because it's you're being very kind of a egoistic kind of a person, because you are sitting in judgment. So to remain balanced and keep retain that balance between the first person's visual account of the story, and a balance between the emotion, not talking as an author, but as the person in that narrative. There's a difference. As an author, you are different, and the person in the protagonist in the story is different. So you first visualize the first person as the protagonist. The voice is that of protagonist. That will sort of give you a little detachment, because the detachment is very, very important when you're writing in the first person, and it is very easy to get carried away. So once you have sort of gone past those factors, the first person works very well. And the last reason why it is difficult to do first person the entire book, say, is that you can't describe yourself. If you are the protagonist, you will find challenges in describing yourself. I am short, I am tall, I am this, I am that. You can't do that. So you have to find tropes to do those. And Least of all, you can't say I'm intelligent, I know how to do it, right? So putting those factors in place in the first person is a little challenging. It takes a little practice, and perhaps you can read a lot of books which are written in first person. And once you've got the balance, I think that's the voice that works best for non-fiction.
Right.
I hope that answers Sonali's question to a certain extent.
For sure, it does. Yes, thank you, Tanushree. I think there are also bridges because most of the discussions we are having are so interrelated. You mentioned attachment and detachment to you, and I feel like when I write, there's a lot of, let's say, attachment to the content, right? So for me, the challenge was also to strip it down to 2,500
Yes.
words or to make it sharp and succinct, right? So can you tell me, can you share some effective maybe editing, or how can we really make sure that we are not indulging, self-indulging, and how can we be very sharp with the content that we churn out?
See, the thing is that you have to sort of get yourself into tuning to that factor that you are detached. This is a story which is real, and yet, if it is biographical, autobiographical, yes, you can talk about your feelings, you can talk about your attachments. There's no, hard and fast rule regarding that. It's very good to do that because you can put your emotion in words, and that works very well for the reader. But if it is a non-fiction which you are accounting in a first person about another protagonist, not yourself, then your voice should not come through it. It
Mm-hmm.
should be, you should be able to imagine the protagonist, describe him in your mind, his behavioral aspects, his talk, his every little nuance of his characteristic, and then imagine how he would be speaking,
Sure.
how he would put the story across. That would give you enough
Yeah.
detachment to handle the story.
Super. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm
Um,
clear.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I have this question quite often that I write a story, but then I spend days together to give it a title. I'm not able to select or choose an appropriate title for my story. For this one, also, I had written this story a long time back, but I submitted on the deadline because I was not able to find a title. So what is the best way to give, like name your story? How can we do that in the best way?
Nazneen, this is not only your problem. I think this is a problem faced by many authors. Even I have to do, but then I have a very funny kind of a quirk. I cannot proceed with the story, my entire
Mm.
writing process, unless I've decided on the title. So my title has to come first, and that sort of clarifies my path. I know that this is the central theme. It is so strong that, like Invitation to Die, it has so much to do with the story that I just know that it is perfect. Girls in Green, I just knew. I kept on toying with a lot of titles. Nothing satisfied me. And the moment you get a right title, it resonates with you, and it is the perfect one. Now, whether you go in a reverse manner or you go write the story and then look for it, the thing is to choose a title which actually in nutshell speaks about your story,
Right.
because that's so impactful. And really spent a lot of time thinking about the titles.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
Tanushree,
you have time till it goes to press to think of the story title.
sure.
Yeah.
The other question that I'm maybe curious about is, I think the way we are either writing or consuming stories and literature is so different. It's more digital now than the
Mm.
hard copy papers and the books. Has that had an impact on maybe the content or the style or the delivery of how you're writing story? Actually, a question for both Nazdeen and Tanushree, yourself. Have you seen a change just because the media has changed in the way you write?
I think the attention span is getting shorter. So we don't have
Mm.
books now which are running into 700 words, or very few, if at all. And like earlier, we had this Leo Tolstoy's books, which are so heavy you can't even carry them. I can't even hold a book now, those kind of book, and read because my hand starts aching. So basically, the attention span is growing shorter. People cannot, and if you do not grab their attention right in the beginning of a book, they may just abandon the book because they don't have the patience. There are a whole lot of new devices that have come up, which allows them to go through a story faster, which works well for them. So to that extent, you must remember that it has to be crisp, it has to be sharp, and I always say brevity is actually the soul of the success of a story. Brevity is where you should this thing, because we cannot go into long fangled, say 5-page description of a place. You have to bring it out in that little scope of 1 page or whatever, it's 500 words. Beyond that, the reader will lose interest. So
Sure.
keeping those in mind, you work towards a more concise and direct approach, which describes things, tackles things without going into reams of newsprint.
Mm. And
So
also
I have
talking
seen
about
that.
the digital.
Sorry. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Also seeing the digitalization of consumption of this content, I've seen so many micro fiction or micro stories doing rounds on the internet. I love the way these are written. Probably just a story in 2 line, but I find it hard to consider it to be I don't know if I'm right to say it, but it's just a thought that you put it down in 2 lines and you call it a story. For me, that doesn't work. But yeah, that is probably the trend that is doing rounds on the net these days.
See, there always will be different kinds of storytelling. So while
Yeah.
microfiction is there, this kind of storytelling that we find in books is not going to go away. It's going to remain as
Mhm.
long as the content is good and people like reading what you've written. It won't matter. I was just reading a book by Anthony Horowitz, and it's a thriller. It's a book within a book. There are two books in the same thing, and it's about 600 or 650 pages. It's that Moonflower Murder. So there are two narratives going simultaneously. There are two books, imagine, and they're going from one end to the other. One chapter of this, and then maybe another chapter of the other one. That kind, or a few, say, 100 pages of this, and then switches to the other story. But it is so well written, it's so engrossing, I couldn't put it down. So
Sure.
even that works. It depends on the content, it depends on the storytelling ability of the writer. So while microfiction will be there will be fiction. While haiku will be there will be poetry. So all these things will coexist. Nothing is going to wipe out any other thing. At least I hope not.
I think what's really encouraging is there'll be as many takers for Test cricket as many for T20. So I'm glad there's room
Yes,
for all kinds of
absolutely.
formats. So great stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, guys, we're approaching the 50-minute mark here. So let's have one final question from Sonali and from Nazneen, and then we'll wind up, if that's good.
Would you
Yeah,
like to go
Sonali,
first,
go ahead.
Nidhi? Okay, sir.
No.
My question would maybe be more around writer's block. Is that a myth, or do you also face it where there is a will to write something, but there is a sudden blank in terms of really coming out with the output? How much do you relate to something called as writer's block?
I relate to it very, very well, because there are months and 6 months and 8 months when I do nothing, not even a single word. It's there in the mind, but I'm not satisfied. I don't put it down. And that works against every little advice that you read from any writer, that write daily, write that many words. But for me, it doesn't work, because till I'm satisfied, I know this is the best that can come out of my brain. I will not finalize it. So it happens. At the same time, I don't feel frustrated. I go and do the other things that have been pending. I read a lot, because one way to unblock your mind is always to read. If you read, it sparks off some ideas. It
Sure.
gives you a impetus, and you go ahead and start writing suddenly. So don't worry about writer's block or something. It unblocks by itself. One shouldn't push oneself very hard when one is being creative. That's
Sure.
my take.
True.
And Tanushree, while writing in third person, how do you make the dialogue delivery effective?
Imagine that you are in that situation and you're speaking to someone, and use the same dialogues that you would, say that time in that situation to that person, then refine it, because it'll be direct, it'll be natural, it'll be, the way it should be. I work that way. So I put myself in the protagonist's shoes, and I think, okay, in this situation, he's tackling this, he's coming across the villain, and he has to, respond to that person. So what will he say? He'll say this, this, this. So that's how I work.
Okay.
That's great advice. I actually remember yesterday we had a session with Shutapa Basu, and she also gave an advice for refining the dialogue. Where she said you write the entire sentence that you want to say, and then you keep removing words, and you keep
Yeah.
saying if the sentence or the epithet of what you're trying to say will survive, even if you remove these words. Because the crisper the dialogue is, the better. But anyway, Sonali, final question before we wrap up.
I think pretty much I got a lot of tips, and it was a session full of insights. Maybe just a curious question on your favorite genre, Tanushree, of literature.
As you know, I have written across so many genres. I don't know if I have a favorite, but I have written historicals, which I really love, and I have written detective stories. I have written military stories, and to each genre, I have given the, same devotion. And I like to read all kinds. I read vastly and across genres.
Super.
It's a lovely answer there. And of course, apart from Tanushree work, you can find Nazneen's work as well as Sonali's work in the Homemaker anthology. The Kindle is available now on Amazon.com. Right, this has got an end to our Homemaker talks. For me, I think this was my 18th talk. It was an honor, it was a pleasure, it was an intimidating task. I am sad that it's over, but it's life. For something to begin, something has to end, I suppose. So fare thee well, audience, and thank you so much to Tanushree for joining us here today, and thank you so much for Nazneen and Sonali for asking such brilliant questions in this session.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you to Sonali and Nazneen, and I wish you the best. If this is the beginning, you will go a long way. Don't worry, just keep going. Have confidence in yourself and keep going.
Thank you so very much.
Thank
Thank you all. Thanks, Neil,
thank you,
for the opportunity.
Tanushree.
Thank you, Tanushree. Thank you,